What is up, brother? How are you? It was it was really good. It was very fucking great. What about you? On Wednesday there was a stream and then on Thursday there was, but we had some no what happened was that we had like an encoder issue. Something got screwed up with our Wi-Fi and we had to not stream. We recorded it, but we didn't get to stream it. Hopefully, we'll be back up for Wednesday. It was actually kind of cool. This like composer named Mike Post who did like you played with him before, right? Salzburglar, yeah. Oh, you were in that game. That's funny because I saw them. Um, Actually, it was really funny because Hank, the tank, wanted to play 2-3 PLO with me, and it was the dustiest, like worst game I've ever been in. No, it was just like it was fucking lame, and I was just like, I hate playing at Commerce, but you know what? That's funny. I didn't see you there, but you were with Mike Post. He was fucking cool. He was a cool ass dude. Yeah, yeah. And my girlfriend's dad, is a he's like the last independent um agent who puts like for composers in TV and movies and commercials and stuff. I was talking to him a couple of days ago. He's like, "Yeah, Mike Post is one of the richest composers like there is, like in my business." Um, word. So last time was a really good session for me to just like diagnose where you're at, what we're doing, what some of the thought processes. The hand history has really helped. I realized that what we need to do is to just because you're really new with solvers is to scale, and this happens for everyone regardless of brain capacity or anything. um, we just have to really start building the thought process from square one. um, right? And just make it in the beginning just as simple as possible. I'm a person, I jump around a lot, and I don't think that actually is going to help you that much. So, my goal is to plug the leaks in your game to um, really give you a framework to how we're going to start attacking flops, how like all these little things that I see in your game that need cleaning up. It's a holistic approach. Um, so I've done something a little bit different. This is probably how we're going to go forward. Let me. Why can I not share? Oh, because I can't see. Um, so I may have to change the resolution on my screen just because I have a massive fucking screen. Um, Let me know if you could see any of this screen. Like, is this tough? No, it might be as simple as that's your hand histories. Are are we on that screen? You can see it. Oh, oh, that's weird. Hold on. When I go entire screen, okay. So are you? Do you only have one monitor? Okay, okay. So yeah, so you're looking at yours. Probably. Let's figure it out. Um, let me try something else on my end really quickly. Um, okay. Now, if I do this and then this, interesting, and then this here, I don't know if this is gonna help. Let's see. Yeah, I don't think that's gonna help. Yeah, I could. What I could do is we could do this stuff later, and we'll just do half and half for right now. Mm-hmm. All right. So can you see? It's still weird with the solver because I want you to see the. It's not this. I want you to see. Honestly, if I do, if I do this, you could obviously see this, right? All right, cool. So we'll work like this. So we're going to do a recap, right? This is about really simply reading different types of boards and different types of players. This is all something that is already ingrained in the subconscious in your game, right? And to bring out a thought process that you could take into your game, every single flop, every single pre-flop situation, we we have to start breaking down these really simple things. And what the first ones, it's pretty much going to be like, who is my opponent, right? And on this board, what is his range? And three, what am I going to do about it, right? It's pretty much poker is the main question is what is my opponent's range and what am I going to do, right? So recapping from last week, right? This is my read on your game, right? And I'm going to start off this way. I don't want to be we're going to go so deeply into this, so I don't want to get hung up on a lot of this stuff. But there are three things that I'm getting from your hand histories. One is you don't write down your wins, right? Every single hand you send me is where you did not win the pot, right? Okay. What that leads me to believe are two things, right? That the hands that you won, like, either don't matter because it's good enough because you won them, right? Um, and two, you don't necessarily think that you could have done anything differently, right? And I'm not 100% sure about the last one, right? But I think what you're doing is like triaging what you think is maybe your issues, right? Where you're saying, hey, I'd rather work on the ones that I lost first, right? Right. So I would absolutely love that because when we're building a process, right? And that's what we'll be doing, a complete thought process. You need to review your winning hands because it's a reward system of that process, right? Right? Because your hand histories just read like, oh, I fucked this up. I fucked this up. I didn't play well, right? And we have to look at our process totally, whether that's, hey, you jammed all in and they folded, right? That sucks, whatever. But it's the right process. Whether that's, you know, you bet thinly on the river and you got called and that's a win. Just like we stack up all of these wins, we look at everything, right? We don't look at just the worst, we don't look at just the best. And obviously, you know, poker is a high variance game. You could be in the hands that you're winning or dragging a pot, you didn't necessarily make the best decision, right? It's a high variance game. So, you know, that variance can cover up a lot of can sometimes cover up mistakes, right? So that's one thing that I encourage you to do, right? Um, Two, what I notice is that your bluffs, right, are not coming from a place of structure, right? They're coming from like you have a read, right? And a pre-flop. And you're like, oh, I've seen this person fold, right? And I am going to make a very out of pocket play, like a really out of pocket play, right? With no backup plan, right? Which is it, it's funny because a lot of the time you're not bluffing from your structured range. Like, hey, um, you know, three bet ace jack suited or ace queen suited, and I'm taking this and putting it into my bluffing range, right? More of your bluffing range comes from, hey, I have jack deuce off. I think I can get this person to fold, and now I'm going to, uh, you know, like start bluffing this hand, right? So, and that's right now. I don't expect you to be bluffing from structure because we've never really looked at a solver, right? We haven't like, you know, bluffed with high equity draws. We haven't, you know, we haven't looked at that. Like all these things that make sense. Um, I understand why. I thought about it a lot today. I understand why you're doing this. Like you're really separating these like bluffs from the beginning, right? And what we're going to teach you to do is start bluffing from just your normal range because it's really hard to make a hand in poker, right? It's really hard to make a pair. A lot of the EV that your hands get, right, and make, um, it comes from bluffing. So you don't have to bluff from, you know, like out of left field. Like, do you watch basketball at all? Okay. So like how I equated it to is that say Steph Curry for some reason notices that a player is not defending the 3-point line that well, right? Like okay, the best shooter in the history of the game, right? You're not their his opponent is not defending the 3-point line that well, and he just takes a shot from half court, right? like that doesn't really make sense, right? That's kind of how I would equate to it. Um, where it's like, hey, he can just go up to the 3 line and take a three, and they're still under defending it. Like he doesn't have to take it from half court. You know what I mean? And then half court shots with no real plan to just like take the jack deuce hand, right? And we'll go over it later, but the jack deuce hand is like you're three betting And it's like, obviously, it's a win if she folds anything, and that's great. But what you're doing is you're making this so out of pocket exploitative play, right? That one, you're opening yourself up to extreme counter exploitation, right? Like extreme. Um, and two, if any stupid fuck picks up jacks on the button or the small blind or the big blind, it's like, or tens or ace queen or absolutely anything, you're just fucked, right? And you're throwing a few $100 down the drain, you know? And that just eats at your win rate. That's what it does, right? And then the last one is just like total fish syndrome from the big blinds. The whole idea of like defending and over defending, and we'll get into this, what it looks like, and how easy it is to play against you. Like so easy to play against you from the big blind just because you're defending so widely. So I really, really encourage you to look at charts to how you should be playing from the big blind, because the big blind and small blind are the least profitable positions, and on the table. And your job is to minimize, right? So if every 100 hands, right, just folding the big blind every single time, you lose 100 big blinds over 100, right? Now, if you can get that to only losing 75, only losing 50, that is a massive win. If you're losing anything over 100, and with the strategy that you're playing, like calling 5x raises from the button with 9-5 off, like for any reason, like there's never a good enough reason. And I know it feels like, hey, we have money invested, but calling a 5x raise, like it should be so freaking, you should be so freaking tight. Because what I tell a lot of, my students, what I do in my exploitative game is I look for spots where my villains their range is indefensible, right? Meaning that it's so wide, if I spam this spot 1,000 times or 1 million times, I'm going to crush them because they literally can't do anything. Like, there is no way to play wide and like play that wide, and make up like any amount of, like, you could win a hand, right? It feels sick when you hit 2 pair and they happen to have aces and you stack them. That's great. That's just never going to happen, right? It's just never going to happen often enough to where it makes sense to make that call. Really, if anything, versus these late position opens, you have to be tighter and more aggressive. Like way tighter and more aggressive, and be 3-betting a lot, because they're more likely to not be, one, they're going to fold more because they're opening super wide and their range becomes indefensible now when they call too much, right? So that whole idea of defensible versus non-defensible, we really want to look at that, right? And if you're going to be the passive player in the situation, you want to have a really defensible range, right? If you're going to be the aggressor, you want to have a range, and the over aggressor, like you want to find where they can't possibly defend their range, and then you just get to like blind aggression, right? Just absolute blind aggression. All right. So those are the three things, and we'll go into all these things a little bit more. I mean, a lot more, but these are the three main takeaways from your hand histories, right? So let's just look at last session, right? We looked at what a solver does, right? How GTO builds opening ranges. We talked about solver outputs, right? And how we want to use those patterns to develop, general heuristics, right? To be like, hey, in this situation, the solver does this. So we want to make, an assumption that we can translate to a lot of different situations, right? And then we also started working with shared vocabulary, right? Hand classes and buckets, right? So let's just go over them really, really quick, right? So what our solver does, right? What it offers us is a baseline preflop strategy, right? It doesn't mean that you need to solve it. I mean, you need to follow it. What it means is that if your opponent is playing a similar baseline strategy, you have the perfect counter strategy, right? Now, two ranges versus each other, right? Two mathematically balanced strategies, right? Remember how we were talking about the millions of iterations of going one range versus another range and it, slightly changing to counter the other ones till it's, unexploitable. That is what GTO is, right? So it looks at just two ranges playing mathematically perfect against each other, right? The third thing, and what we're going to be working with, because how it actually is applied to the real life game that you play, is node locking, right? So what node locking is we manually override the baseline strategy to mimic a real opponent's tendencies, right? And then resolve, right? For the optimal way to counterattack them, right? So we also talked about how GTO likes to build its opening ranges. Remember how we looked at 5-4, and we're like, hey, this actually doesn't have a plus EV, right? But they're doing it because it needs to have really, really strong holdings on boards like 8-5-4 or 7-3 deuce. It needs to have strong draws. It needs to have two pairs. So it really likes to have a lot of board interaction and board coverage, right? So if a board like 8-5-4 comes, our only strong hands can't be 8s, 5s, and 4s, right? It has to be 5-4. It needs to be 6-7. It needs to be, and then also like aces, kings, and queens, they're good. They're over pairs, but they're still just one pair hands. And when we're playing infinite deep, and sometimes in that 5-10 game, you're going to play 200, 300 big, 400 big blinds deep. One pair is not really that great, right? When a lot of money's going in the middle. So remember that in an opening range, a GTO opening range, or every opening range that you've ever been given, like every combo it has a job, right? Like aces wants to get value from kings. 5-4 wants to get 6-7 to fold, right? Like it's kind of how we work. It's like if 5-4 is the very worst hand that you have, and we get to the river and it's 7-6 king 10 like blank, and 5-4 is your absolute worst hand. If you bluff, right, literally any fold that you get any percentage of the time makes that a win, right? Now a lot of the time you're going to get called because they're going to have something, but if you can get them to fold one single combo of their hand in their hand, it's a win, right? because it's the worst you have. So a lot of the EV from hands like 5-4, from hands that have just no showdown value, that never really get to the river that often as the winner, right? A lot of their EV or coming back from negative EV actually comes from bluffing, right? And I'm not talking about like getting them to fold on the flop. I'm talking about like very big monster triple barrel bluffs, right? So we're going to start looking at how to construct our bluffing range and being like, hey, if we're going to be playing 5-4, we're obviously not going to hit, flushes and straights that often and two pairs that often. So like we're going to have to figure out something to do with 5-4. And to add that, if your opponents are rarely ever folding, right? 5-4 may not be a profitable open, even though it is the best. That's my favorite hand in poker. But it may not be as profitable as we think it is. And just because it's in an opening range doesn't mean that it's actually making us money, right? Okay, yeah. So solver output to heuristics, right? We're identifying and we're looking across the solver for recurring logic, sizing, textures, frequencies, and we're saying to ourselves, hey, we could probably put this on another board. We could do this. Like, for instance, us c-betting 100% of the time. We could do this because we have a range advantage and a nut advantage, and they are very wide, right? I'll explain all what that means, right? But we can move that from king 7 deuce to ace 7 deuce. We can move that from king 7 deuce to 10 9 5, right? And then the second part is identifying player types, right? And what player types all they are, it's just a predictive model of what we think our opponent's strategy to be, right? We just use these models. It's the raw input for node locking, right? And we say, this is what villain is doing with this holding, this holding, this holding, this holding, this holding in this spot, blah, 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 blah. Input that into node locking, and now we have a counter strategy. What I see a lot in your thinking, right, is like, for instance, you'll say this player just check raised all in with a bluff, right? Which is really, really important information, right? When we're node locking, we don't let either recency bias or just like one hand kind of dictate our total read on a player, right? We note this. We say, hey, they are capable of this. They do this a certain amount of time. We don't just hope for the best and say, hey, this person is probably bluffing because I saw them bluffing, right? What we do is we balance against, hey, what is all the value that they possibly could be doing this with, that they're doing this with 100% of the time, right? And that's where range construction and really looking at the mathematics of a solver, really helps. So we don't have this recency bias, right? Now, if a player is playing like a maniac, right, and they just have absolutely so much air and bluffs in their range, our calls get way more profitable, and we just have to call, right? Even sometimes with ace high, right? But that's what identifying the player type is, right? We looked at hand classes, right? Can play for stacks. Thick value says we could get, we can extract value from pretty much their entire range, almost their entire range, right? Thin value says we could still extract some value, but narrowly, right? We're ahead of just a small portion of their range that they could call, right? Um, Showdown value, right? Which says, hey, we want to get to a cheap showdown. We can no longer um, extract enough value, like thin value, that warrants a bet, right? That's all showdown value is. And there's air, there's strong hands, strong draws and weak draws, right? Strong draws I like to classify as 8+ outs, weak draws, 6+ outs. And we're talking about to nuts. Like say we have an open-ended straight draw, but there's a flush draw on the board, and we, two spades on the board, and we have two diamonds, right? It's like, yeah, we have an 8-out draw to the straight, but two of those cards are going to be spades, right? So we really don't have the strongest draw. We don't have an 8-out draw. We have a 6-out draw, right? Right? Brings in we'll bring in a flush, right? So we like to classify those as weak draws. We like to classify gut shots as weak draws. And then we talked about really advanced draw types like backdoor straight draw, backdoor flush draw, single over cards, two over cards, wrapping. So hand like king jack on queen XX, right? We're wrapping around the queen. Meaning that like if any 9, any ace comes, any 10 comes, we have a draw, pretty much a backdoor flush draw. I mean, sorry, a straight draw. And then this is really good is that I asked you every hand identify what kind of player you're up against. And right now your vocabulary is a little, it's not your vocabulary that's limited. I don't think we're looking at things holistically yet because we haven't gone there, and that's completely fine. But the fact that you're starting to think, hey, I've seen this player do this. Hey, this player, is ABC or doing things, right? They're doing things. That is really good. This week, we're going to go into what actual player types I want you to categorize and what their characteristics are, right? It's kind of like just a shortcut to node locking, right? So this is what we're going to do this week, right? And if we can get through it all, we're going to read the different types of board classifications, right? We're going to look at some basic GTO vocabulary, just so we can have, and I'm going to send this all to you, right? Obviously, like you get all of this. And in the future, if you want me to record these sessions and send them to you, just let me know. That's completely fine as well. The slides, yeah. Definitely. So we're going to look at 3 really simple flops. We're going to look how GTO likes to play them, right? So we can start seeing why things happen, right? We're going to talk about the different player types in your game specifically. And we're going to look at those same flops, right? And we are going to change them. And we're just going to look at the flop today, right? I'm just looking today as 150 big blinds effective, button versus big blind. It is the most common spot that you're going to be in. And I think it is going to, serve you best by looking at the most common spots you're in, right? And we're just going to look at the flop, and next time we'll get to the turn and river. But I really just want to, and this is also like another introduction to how the solver thinks in a little bit more of a granular way. That's why we're just looking at flops. And to tell you the truth, if you have a really good pre-flop strategy, you're putting yourself in a really good spot for a really good flop strategy. And if you have a really good flop strategy, you're putting yourself in a really good spot for a turn and river strategy, right? So we like to build on these things sequentially, right? And we often say that mistakes are compounded on future streets, right? So if you make a mistake pre-flop, right, you can't undo that mistake. You can't get yourself out of it, right, by the river, right? But if you make a good play on pre-flop, you're in position to make a great play on the flop and then the turn in the river. Does that make sense? Yeah, start with a really comprehensive strategy. And that doesn't mean you can't adjust. You can't color outside of the lines because you have a read. But we always have a read. Um, if we have a read, we're not shooting from half court, right? We're shooting from like maybe a couple feet behind the three, right? Okay, so we're reading a board. There are three different ways that we look at boards, and I think this is going to help you, right? We have static versus dynamic, right? And let me know if you have or you haven't heard any of these terms before. A static board is a board that, I'll lean back, hold on. Lean back. I gotta move in. So a static board is regardless of what comes in on the turn, the equities are not going to change as drastically, meaning that the nuts is not going to change. So on ace-7 deuce rainbow, the only thing that could really change, right, is the nuts is 3, 4, 5, right? That's really not a lot. Aces are still going to be the nuts and the effective nuts almost all the time, right? So that's what we call a static board. A dynamic board, right, is a hand like 9, 8, 7 with 2 clubs because so many different club cards can come, right? A 10 can come, right? A 6 could come. It's still there are just so many different cards that are rapidly changing the equities where, hey, Jack 10, could not be good anymore, right? So ones that are dynamic, the nuts can change very frequently. Static, they change very infrequently. Does that make sense? Cool. Yeah, that one's easy. I mean, they're all kind of easy. You're gonna be great with this. So, wet versus dry, right? A hand like a dry board, ace 8-3 rainbow, doesn't really have a lot of draws, right? It's not two-tone, meaning that it's not, it doesn't have any flush draws. It has very little straight draws, whereas Jack 10-6 has all of the flush draws, king, queen, queen 9, 7-8, 7-9. You get the idea, right? Pretty simple. And then we have connected versus disconnected. Disconnected is like queen 7 deuce. Connected 9-8-7, right? 9-8-6. So when we're putting together all of these different ones, we kind of look at, hey, this is, wet and static. It's dry and dynamic, right? This is how we look at boards because this is going to be a future indicator of strategy, when we want to slow down, when we want to, like, for instance, I see a lot of the time where if you have an overpair, you are piling money in regardless of what the board looks like, regardless of like, oh, there are a lot of draws out there. Like, I'm going to charge those draws, which is a good thought, right? But it doesn't necessarily give the whole picture because we're talking about, hey, we want to get value from a hand for three streets. So we have a hand like aces, right? We want to get value as much as we possibly can. And can we actually get value for three streets with this hand for 150 big blinds deep? And when money is pouring into this pot, are we actually going to be good? Even with a hand as strong as aces. And this is the really, really tough part about deep stack cash games. Even when you're raising like, 4x, like it's still pretty deep and you're still sometimes playing 200 big blinds deep or 300 big blinds deep, is that people are getting pretty smart about not stacking off with like king 9 versus your aces on 954, right? Like on this connected dry board, like they're stacking off with 6-7. They're continuing with 7-8 backdoor straight backdoor flush, and then only continuing when they're picking up equity on the turn. So I'm not saying that it's not good to get value with your aces, but we have to be really, really cognizant of what boards we're playing on, right? And a great way to do that is to be like, hey, king 7 deuce, this is dry, this is disconnected, but it is dynamic because, right, if an ace comes, that really, really screws up my top pair, right? So it's still dynamic, right? Whereas 9-8-7, it's wet because it has a lot of draws, but there aren't a lot of cards that come that screws up Jack 10, right? Right. So that in that way, it's static. In that way, it's static. A monotone board, right, only really changes the nuts when the board pairs. That's pretty infrequent, right? So monotone board is wet, but it's static, right? So right now, just with you, let's look at all of these boards and let's just call them out together, right? That's to 100%. Yeah, and this is not like pop quiz, right? This is not pop quiz time. Like if you get it wrong, then you're never going to learn it. No, this is just, hey, let's look at these together and be like, and let's work through it, right? So let's just work on a7 deuce, right? Is this connected or disconnected? It's disconnected, right? Like, yes, there's some straight draws, but gut shots, right? So is it wet or dry? It's dry, right? So if the 6 of spades comes, does that change the equities that much? No. So aces is still the nuts here, right? Cool. So when you look at this flop, we say it's static, dry, and disconnected. Yeah, just the gaps, right? Right, the gaps. Like, is there a lot of straight draws involved, right? Are there a lot of, um, yeah, just like, are there a lot of straight draws involved, right? So let's go to Queen, King, Jack, Rainbow, right? So connected or disconnected? connected, right? Is it wet or dry? I would too. I would too, because tens, any nines a straight draw, like any ace is a straight draw. Um, and then this is actually kind of cool. It's working together. Like, do you think this one's static or dynamic? This this one's a this one's a little bit tough. Okay, so let's think about what the nuts is, right? It's ace 10. So if a deuce 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 come, right? Does that change the nuts? Yeah, yeah, right? Yeah. If it wasn't rainbow, it would be dynamic. Exactly. Yeah. So this one's actually pretty hard. Um, so let's do 887, right? So paired boards. You hate paired boards. You hate paired boards. Okay, right? So ace eight is still going to be nuts. 8-7 is still going to be nuts if a king comes, right? For the most part, right? Um, so this is a static board too, right? Um, wet versus dry, it is dry, right? There are some uh, straight draws, but for the most part, paired boards are. This is actually tough because when they're paired and connected, right? They kind of, they do have a lot of draws. Like 9-5 is a draw, 9-6 is a draw, 10-9, Jack 10. So it's actually a little bit more wet. Um, there are some there are enough draws out there to maybe call this wet. Um, right, it's more wet than dry, but it's still static because even if a 10 comes, right, and like the straight draw comes in, it's still like 8-7 still the nuts, right? Pocket sevens is still nuts, right? And then Jack 10-9 rainbow, sort of, yeah. So yeah, let's go connected, right? Wet because it's all together, right? Um, yeah, it's a lot like that. Um, so what about Queen 6-4? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we could even go further to say, um, well, look, let me go and say actually that it's not static because any king can come, any ace can come, and that wildly changes equities. Yeah, the overcards. When there's an overcard, that could really change things, right? Unless it's monotone, right? But how I would classify this is dynamic, dry, for the most part, disconnected, but we're kind of connected on the low end a little bit. 5-3, 7-6. It has some connection, right? Yeah, it's some connection. It's not the most connective board, right? Um, but hey, if villain has 7-5 in their range, it starts becoming very connected, right? If they have 5-3 in their range, it starts becoming pretty connected. Um, so every time we look at a board, we're gonna go, and we don't have to go through all of these, right? Um, but every time we look at a board, we want to ask ourselves, or we look at a flop, we want to ask ourselves this because it's a prediction of, hey, where are our bluffs coming from, right? Where are their calls coming from? Where are their raises coming from, right? If you get, like, for instance, If it comes ace seven deuce and you get check raised on it, right? But button versus big blind, do you really think that the villains in your game are taking hands like 8-7 suited and check raising with middle pair? Sorry, ace seven deuce. Yeah, and we're gonna be looking at this spot in a little bit, so maybe we don't even get into it. But you know what? Let's save it. Let's save the questions for after this. Let's just go through with these boards, right? Let's look at these terms we're going to use a lot, and it's okay if you don't understand them immediately, right? So it's range advantage and nut advantage, right? This is the core of GTO frequencies and sizing. And frequencies and sizings just mean how often I bet and how much I bet, right? And they're all based off of these two principles of range advantage and nut advantage. And what range advantage says is that my range, right? Every single hand that I have in this spot, right? Right? On average, across this specific board, right, is going to have more equity versus your range. Does that make sense? Yeah. Right. So nut advantage, right, is different. Nut advantage says one range, right, can only have the strongest possible holdings. For instance, right, say you open on the button, right, and big blind calls. You can say for the most part they don't have aces, kings, or ace king, right? And obviously there are going to be some players that, you know, like get weird and like just flat those hands. But and sometimes they're not going to do it every time. So you have all of the ace kings, you have all of the aces, you have all of the kings. If it comes ace king deuce, you have a nut advantage because you're the only ones who can have aces, kings, and ace king. Does that make sense? So at the same time, if you open on the button and the big blind calls and it comes 6-4-3, I'm not saying that you're not opening 7-5, right? But maybe sometimes you're not opening 7-5 for whatever reason, and they're always calling 7-5 suited, right? They're the only ones that can have 7-5 suited, or they have a 7-5 suited a greater majority of the time, right? So, and they also have sixes, fours, and threes, just like you do, sets of them, right? And they have 6-4 where maybe you don't have it. Maybe they have 6-3 for two pair. That means that big blind now has the nut advantage, right? Does that make sense? All right, cool. Um, we'd have to look at the charts. GTO, maybe some of like 5-3 won't, maybe 7-5 and 6-4 won't. Maybe we start with 8-6. Um, it really depends. For me, it always depends on my opponent, how wide they're going to call, because if they're calling 8-6 off, I feel really good about opening 8-6 suited, right? If they're going to call 3 deuce suited, I'm really good with opening 8-6 suited. But if they're not calling, like super wide, then I'm probably not expanding to like double gappers like 9-6 suited, right? It's like they have to be really bad for me to like if they're going to be very tight and aggressive, I'm not opening wider. If they're just going to fold, I'll open wider. Um, if they are going to be super aggressive and they're going to 3-bet me a lot, I am going to tighten up my range so that maybe I'm only opening like 7-6, 6-5, and 5-4. Maybe not even the gappers. It really depends. So equity advantage and range advantage is similar. It's just more raw equity in my range across all boards. Very similar. Do you know the idea of polarized versus linear? You've probably heard it. All right. So linear, it refers to betting, right? It refers to a betting range. So if you are betting, and it's really easier with a chart, but say you are betting all of your best hands, your medium strength hands, and your worst hands, right? Or let's just say your best and your medium strength hands, right? Right? That is a linear betting. So when you look down the chart, it moves from left to right to down. So you're just betting your best hands, right? Sorry, your best hands and then your medium strength hands. Polarized is saying, I am betting my best hands and my worst hands, right? So I'm betting my best hands for value, right? And I'm betting my worst hands as a bluff, right? Whereas linear, it's saying I am betting all of these good, better, best hands because I think I can get value from a lot, right? And what GTO likes to do is that when it's linear and it thinks it can get value from a lot or continues from a lot, it likes to bet small, right? When it bets larger, right, it starts going to a polarized range, right? Because what that says is, hey, I could get a lot of value from hands that are just below me, and the middle part of their range, I could use the bottom part of my range to get them to fold the middle part. Does that make sense? Exactly. 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 And so we'll be talking about when to use a linear range versus a polarized range. The other two things, we already talked about board coverage, right? So it's like a representation and distribution across boards. So like say I'm in the big blind and I have king six suited and it comes, let's say king six of spades and it comes five of spades, three of diamonds, deuce of diamonds, right? 5-3 deuce, and I have king six of spades. So I have a backdoor flush draw, and let's just classify it now. I have a backdoor flush draw. I have two overs, and I have a gut shot, right? Right. So if a four comes, if any spade comes, um, I have some backdoor equity. I'll probably keep barreling. What's also cool about this, right? And this is I love taking hands like king six and check raising them because a lot of villain, right, in the button, they're going to be folding their king X hands, right? When you check raise them on 5-3 deuce, right? For the most part, they're going to like king queen is just going to fold, king jack, king 10, right? So when a king comes, right, and you still have hands like king six in your range, right? you now have supreme board coverage. Because they probably still only have ace king for a gut shot, which they may fold anyway, and like kings. But when a king comes, right? Like you're doing really good. It's the same thing like if you have queen six and a queen comes, you now have board coverage on that queen, right? So it's kind of cool. The other thing is that we talk about capped ranges, and capped ranges literally means that by their actions, they most likely can't have very strong hands, right? Most likely, it's like they're when we say someone is capped, we say they don't have a nut advantage, and based on their actions, they likely don't have a very strong hand, right? Or can't have the strongest of hands. Okay, cool. We are going to get into that only took an hour. That only took an hour. Okay. So I'm going to make this a little smaller, and we are going to look at we're going to go into the solver. I think battery is low. Just said my headphone just said battery is low, but I'm not on the battery. Weird. Okay. Can you see this? Like, can you see the solver, not the slide? Really? Okay. Is this better? Okay. Let me see. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to represent, but just the solver. Let's try that. I'll get this fixed. I remember last time I actually had to make it smaller to make it look better. Right? Yeah. So let's see. You can see from here, right? All right, cool. Let me just see if I can now move this guy around so that I can see something. All right, cool. So it is button versus big blind, right? It folds around to you on the button. You are the button. You're going to be in position, and this is going to give us a framework for all of our imposition play, right? What hands are you opening? Yeah. Yes. Yeah, but okay. I'm asking you right now if we're going to range construct. So hold on. Let me go to range builder, right? What hands are you opening on the button? Yes. Personally, what are you opening on the button? Let's see how good you are. All Broadway is right. You know how I like to think about this, by the way, right? Is that like, say I was opening Jack 10 all the way through here, right? I say to myself, I am opening offsuit 10s, right? Offsuit 10s includes offsuit jacks, offsuit queens, offsuit kings, right? Now, if I'm opening offsuit nines, right? I'm opening 10-9 all the way to ace-9. That's offsuit 9. And if I'm opening suited sevens, I say a7 through 8-7, right? And so if I had a range that was, let me say I'm on the cutoff, right? Let's say I'm on the cutoff. I'm opening more than likely off. What the fuck was this? Hold on. Where's my painter? Oh, here we go. Hint? No. Let's see. And it says what I should be raising 3x is 28%, right? I know that 28%, right? Here we go. Let me just go to 100. I'm doing offsuit sevens, right? I'm doing, no, sorry, suited sevens and offsuit tens, right? Oh, and obviously I'm doing, get rid of that. I'm doing pairs, let's say we're up to 4, right? So I know that I'm filling now in everything else in these boxes because I'm opening my suited sevens, right? Because if I'm opening suited sevens, I'm opening all of my suited eights, right? That's a linear idea. Anything above that, right? I know that I am not opening my offsuit nines, but I'm probably opening ace-9, right? I am definitely, an ace-6 is a weird hand that I hate, but I am at least opening this. I'm probably doing all the way to king-4. I am opening this. And when I get to my hints, I'm at 26.4. So if I throw in pocket threes, I'm getting closer, right? Maybe ace-8 or ace-5 off. Get rid of pocket threes, and I'm pretty much at 28, right? So I say to myself, right, I'm opening fours plus, my offsuit tens, my suited sevens, right? This is my cutoff range, and a little bit of ace X off, ace 3 plus, ace 3 suited plus, some of my kings 6, 5, 4, right? And some suited connectors, right? That's how I look at that, right? So now we're moving to a one position later, right? And you actually open usually to 4x. Am I wrong? On the button. So you're opening 4x, and I'll give you a hint. It's 37%. So you said fours plus? Okay, so you're opening all your pairs. I don't know why they don't give you buckets, so you can just be like, you have to click all these, all right? What is your offsuits? Are you opening tens? Are you opening nines? Right, yeah. So you're saying you're opening. Okay, so let's think about it horizontally first before you add in like a weird hand like 9-8, which it could be an open, and I think it probably is an open. You're right. But are you doing suited offsuit eights or offsuit nines? So if we're going across here, are you opening queen 8 off? All right. All right. So that means you're opening all of these. I think this is way too wide, but we will go with it. And I think that you should be doing offsuit nines, but let's go with it. Let's see. So you're suited fives, suited sixes, which one? Cool. And then vertically, are we opening like we're definitely opening 8-6. Are we opening 8-5? So you are going to be everything in here, right? So that means that your button range as of right now is suited sixes. You see that going down and offsuit eights, right? So right. So you're opening your suited connectors 5-4. Do you go down to 4-3? On the button, you don't open 5-4 or 6-5. Okay. So, right. So how often do you actually play small blind versus big blind? Do you guys chop or do you guys play? Oh, big. So that's funny. You don't, yeah, you don't have a big blind range, which is why you play so loose for the big blind. You don't have, because it's always big blind verse, right? That's what it all is. Okay, so I will tell you this right now that we okay. Let's keep going. Are you opening King 5 suited? All right, cool. And so it's wild to me is that you will open 9-8 off, but you will not open 6-5-5-4. Um, that is absolutely wild to me, and you won't open King 4 suited and King 3. Right. So I'll tell you right now that in a GTO uh, world, like you're actually hitting frequency pretty high. Like you're raising 39%, right? And it wants you to raise 37%. What I would probably do is I would go King 4, I would go Ace Deuce, I would go King 3, I would go 6-5-5-4, probably open 7-5. I would not open uh these suited eights. I'd probably only open suited nines, but I would throw in King 8 and Ace. Oh, sorry. I would throw in King 8 and Ace 4 off. Um, I like Ace 4 off better than Ace 6 off because the wheel possibilities, right? Ace 6, 8, 7, like you really can't get value from worse aces. Um, but you can get a lot of value with the wheel, which is why Ace 6, Ace 7 are like no man's land hands. I would also be opening threes and deuces personally, because that's a really, really powerful. You can put in a lot of money. Um, well, that has to do with equity realization. Like this is probably what I would do. I would probably I would probably go a little bit wider. So I would be like this, right? Now, let's go back, right, and see what GTO does. So let's go to study, and we are going around. We're getting wider. We're getting wider. We are 4x from the button, right? So they are doing suited suited sevens, right? All the pairs, right? Suited sevens, offsuit nines, right? With all of the all of yeah, all of this ace, right? It's doing some double gappers, right? 9-6 suited some of the time. These gappers 8-6, but not 7-5. Um, this is what it's doing. It's always doing 5-4 suited, right? Have to have to open 5-4 suited. You're going to see, and like what we talked about before, is that 5-4 suited is an open under the gun. At least, yeah, at least some of the time, right? Because we need to have 5-4, so on 7-3 deuce we can have a draw. You know, like we need to have, like on king 5-4, our best hand just can't be kings and aces, right? We need to have 5-4 sometimes. We need to have a little bit of 6-7. But like we don't like 9-8. We don't like 8-7, but we like 6-5, 5-4. We like opening it. We like calling a 3-bet with 5-4 and 6-5. Yeah, we'll get through that in a little bit, but we're just talking about the button, and this is raising 37.3% of the time, right? And if you want to shave off king jack 6 suited and jack 5 suited, completely fine with it, and going down to like 37%. And small blind's going to fold. Big blind is calling with this range, right? And this is a GTO solve. I want you. This is a GTO solve, which means what GTO likes to do from the big blind here, right? Is, and I'll look at this number, 72% fold, right? You see that? What do you think that number does when under the gun raises versus when the button raises? One. 100%. So let's just look at that, right? We went from 72 to now 91%. So when in your game, when under the gun is raising, you should be folding pretty much absolutely everything. And really, you're only calling 5%. It wants you to 3-bet these hands sometimes. It wants you to 3-bet these hands sometimes. Raise is red. Yeah. Call is green. So when we're on the button, and when the button raises, it's when the button raises, it's open. It's 37% of hands. The big blind, right, wants to take a lot of hands and get them to fold right now. Now we're not going to go into big blind 3-betting ranges. We're not going to go into that right now, like why you should be sometimes taking like 10-9 suited and start raising it, right? Because you're like, oh, 10-9 and jack 10, these are really playable hands, right? Like when you, like, what are you raising? That's a better question. Say the button opens, what hands are you 3-betting besides 9-3 offsuit? Sometimes, yeah, when you want to spaz out and do 9-3 offsuit. Yes, I'm talking about if we are at a table right now and an unknown player, you're in the big blind, unknown player raises the button to 4x. What hands are you 3-betting? Okay, that's what I thought, right? You could see how in this strategy it's way more complex, right? Okay, so this is what's going to happen when I click big blind call, right? So when the button opens and the big blind just calls, in their range, in this solve, right, they're not going to have king queen suited because they would have raised with it. They're not going to have queen jack suited or jack 10 suited or jack 9 suited, right? Or some of king 10 suited, right? Right? Or some of king queen offsuit and king jack offsuit, because some of the time, right, not all of the time, in this solve, right? They will have 3-bet. So this is a really, really super important thing. When I hit call, they will have zero, big blind will have zero frequency of king, queen suited, right? They will have what looks like half frequency of king, jack offsuit. And I could go here and it looks like, yeah, 44% of the time they're raising and 55% of the time they're calling. So in this solve, their number of combinations of king, jack offsuit are going to reduce from 12 now to like 6 to 7, right? Meaning when a king and a jack comes, it's not the same because you are going to have full frequency of king, jack, right? All right, cool. So no problem. This is just till we nail this down. It's just this is really, really important solver sort of thing. So for instance, I'm on the big blind. I'm sorry, I'm on the button and I raise. And I am raising the full frequency of king, jack offsuit, right? Right. 100% of the time. Never not. Never limping, always raising. And let's say for this experiment, I'm always raising to 4x, right? Now, when you are on the big blind, right? And let's not say you, let's say the big blind, right? So now it comes around to the big blind, right? If at any point big blind is 3-betting at some frequency king, jack offsuit, right? Who has more king, jack offsuit in their range when big blind just calls? So for instance, say, let me pull up the notes. Let me pull up my notes, right? So, because I'm a visual learner, right? Sometimes I have to write things down. So button opens 4x king, jack offsuit, right? At 100%, right? We've got that, right? King, jack offsuit is 12 combinations, right? Right? Okay. It comes around to the big blind, right? And in this strategy, I'm not saying this is our strategy, though you will be in a very, very tough player to play against if you adopt the strategy. And we'll talk about that pre-flop strategy later. But say the big blind, 45% of the time, right? Let's look at it. 44.4, let's just say 45.55. 45% of the time they take king, jack offsuit and 3-bet it, right? And 55% of the time they take king, jack offsuit and they call. And that means 0% of the time they fold, right? No folds. So they're either calling or 3-betting, and roughly half and half. They are, and let's just say for the sake of just this experiment, they are splitting half and half. So that means, right? And this is a computer, like this is a bot, right? It's easy to look at it like this, but in this simulation, every 6 combos or every 50% of the time they're calling, and every other 50% of the time they're raising, and it's random. It's random, right? But what we can deduce is that every time they raise, it's six combinations, half of 12. And every time they call, it's six combinations, right? Are we good there? We're good. Okay. So say big blind calls, right? How many combinations of king jack offsuit are they taking to the flop? Yeah, so say a random flop like 7-3-6 comes, right? How many combinations of king jack offsuit does villain have in their range? Big blind have in their range? Big blind. Actually, that's a great question. How many combinations on any flop, right? Any random flop, when, or let's just say right before any random flop, when button opens and big blind calls, how many combinations of king jack offsuit does the button have? Should be 12, right? And when the big blind calls, how many does it have in this simulation? Yes, 100%. So if big blind calls, right, it has six combos of king jack off, right? So, right, because the other half of the time they would have three bet. So now we're moving to the flop where big blind still has king jack offsuit, right? But only half the time. So, right, if I hit the call button here, right, and it comes king, jack, four. Big blind checks. They don't have as much king jack as we have. And they, meaning the big blind, does not have a lot of king jack because half the time they would have three bet it, right? Right? So what I'm showing you right now is something called frequencies and solvers by saying if they are splitting their action, if big blind is splitting their action with calling sometimes and three betting some other times, they move forward through to the flop and to the turn and to the river with less of what they would have three bet if they just called. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. Okay, cool. Okay, so, and we don't need to harp on this, but okay, let's take this really simply, right? And this is completely fine because this is a complicated idea, right? Say the button raises, right? So where's our button raise? In this simulation, it never raises 9-3 suited, right? We can agree? So to the flop, how many combinations of 9-3 suited does it take? Zero, right? Zero, because it never raises it. So this part of the range, all the stuff in blue fades away, right? And in this simulation, it's only taking 30% of Jack 5, right? So when it gets, sorry, Jack 5 suited. So on the flop, it doesn't have full frequency of Jack 5 suited. It only has 30%. Does that make sense? Right. So it's the same thing, whereas Queen 5 suited, we're taking every single combination of queen five suited to the flop, but only roughly 1 in 4, right? 1 in 3. So when we're what I mean by okay, so combination, I mean there are 4 combination of suited hands, right? Queen five, yeah, queen five of diamonds, queen five of clubs, queen five of spades, queen five of hearts. There are 12 combinations of offsuit hands, right? So queen five offsuit, right, is queen of hearts, five of spades, queen of hearts, five of diamonds, queen of hearts, five of clubs, queen of spades, five of hearts, and so on and so on, right? So, and we don't need to get deep in combinatorics. What it means when someone splits their range, right? And what I mean by split range is that sometimes they're going to have it and sometimes they're not. It means at the next node, and by the next node here, it's the flop, right? The button is just, I'm sorry, the big blind is just not going to have as much king jack holdings, right? Because what we've seen is that it's 3 betting king jack suited, right? And king jack offsuit roughly 50% of the time, right? And 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 I could demonstrate this easier, right? And I don't know why I didn't do this, right? Say we're on the big blind, right? In this solve, say big blind is 3 betting here in red all of king queen suited, right? If they just call, right? Right? How often do they have king queen suited on a flop? Big blinds. We're talking about big blind. So big blind's the only one who can 3-bet the button, right? Exactly. So they're going to take absolutely zero king queen suited, absolutely zero aces, absolutely zero ace kings, zero kings, zero jacks, right? Zero jack tens, zero ace jack suited. They can't have these in their range anymore. Does that make sense? Sorry. So, okay, cool. So sorry that I used a more complex one first. That's yeah. Okay. So remember that concept that they can't have aces, kings. They no longer can have it because they would have raised, right? So big blind calls, and we have the ace of spades. Sorry, ace of spades, 7 of diamonds, deuce of clubs, right? And now what we are looking at is the GTO solve of this is the big blinds range. Okay. So what is it missing? It's missing aces, kings, ace king, ace queen, king queen, right? It's missing all of the percentage of their range that they have 3-bet, right? So now when we're looking at king jack off, see how it only fills up halfway, right? That means that it only has it like half the time. Okay, cool. So when we're looking horizontally in the boxes, king six off was supposed to 3-bet like around half the time, right? So it doesn't have as much king six suited. And that's all I was trying to explain. Sorry that it took so long to get there. All right, cool. Just like it has 0 10 pocket tens, it has 0 pocket aces. It sometimes took a little bit of ace nine and it 3-bet it. So it actually doesn't have it there. So we're through that. That was my fault. Cool. So what I want to do now is, and this is how we decide who gets to bet and why they get to bet, right? right? This is like, okay, for instance, in this solve, usually what happens is that the big blind is going to check, right? And the button gets to bet a lot, right? So in your game, if you opened on the button and it came ace seven deuce, you would more than likely um, continuation bet, C bet for a small sizing, right? That's just what most people do. So I'm going to show you why the button gets to do that, right? It's not just like an old wives' tale. It's like, oh, you get to C bet because you do. There's a specific reason why the solver allows you to do this, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to look at this is starting to get complex, and just tell me to slow down if I have to, right? On the right in green, right? This is all of the button, right? As you can see, this is the range of the button, right? And the range on the left is the big blind, right? This is the big number that I want you to take from this. See where it says equity? On this flop, ace seven deuce rainbow, button has an equity advantage or a range advantage by about 2.4%. Do you see that, the equity? Yes, that's 50. What it's saying is that button's range on this flop, right? 52.4% of the time, which is very slight equity advantage, it has an advantage on this board, right? And since it has an advantage, it gets to bet very often. So think about this. Pretty much it's like, okay, I'm ahead on a lot of these boards. I get to bet very often, right? So, sorry, on this board, I'm ahead with a lot of my holdings, so I get to bet, right? Now, as the equity advantage gets bigger, so if this was 59%, right, you would see the button being able to bet more like 80% of the time, 90% of the time. So when we look at the strategy and big blind checks, right? What it says is that we're betting 33% of the time, or sorry, 33% of the pot, right? Roughly half of the time. That's what the GTO solve says, right? Yes, 2.8 big blinds, exactly. Right? So what we have, no, it's 1/3. 1/3. Yeah, 2.8 big blinds because the pot is like 8 big blinds. We went 4 plus 4, right? Plus 8.5. So 2.8 is, 30. Yeah, 1/3, right? So we've determined that button's range is slightly stronger than big blind's range on this board, ace seven deuce, right? Where do you think that strength comes from? And we're looking right now at, on the right, we are looking at button's range. On the left, we are looking at big blind's range. And right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to help you out. What are the strongest hands on this board? dude, you're 100% spot on, right? So aces, all the sets, right? All of the two pairs, right? Now, when we look at the big blinds range, what are they missing? Because all of the hands that you just mentioned, right, including a7 offsuit, right, which is different than a7 suited because it has more combinations, right? So when we're looking at all of the sets and all of the two pairs, what is big blinds range here on the left missing? Right. Yep. A7, A7 offsuit, right? And right, if some of the times in this simulation, right, you can see that A7 suited is not full, right? So it actually has less. It has a little bit less, like 10% less. And the same thing goes with pocket sevens and pocket deuces because it three bet a little bit of the time, right? So ultimately, the button one has full frequency of pocket aces, right? It has full frequency of ace7 off, where big blind has zero, right? And it has more ace7 suited, more pocket sevens, and more pocket deuces. That's where the strength of this comes from. Right, exactly. So that 3%, it's all coming from this. Because what you can see is that you see the combos right here where my right? Notice how many more combinations button is playing in this simulation than um, big blind. So big blind is playing like less than half of the combinations here, right? So they're tighter, but they're not as top heavy. Yeah, top heavy. Top heavy meaning like it doesn't have aces, kings, queens, jacks. Right. Right. So even though one range is so much tighter, this super wide range, since it's so top heavy and since it's what we call uncapped, it has aces and kings and queens, right? And it has a7 offsuit and it has a7 suited and full frequencies of sevens and ace deuce. Because of all that, that's where the range advantage comes from and the nut advantage, right? Because it has all of the best hands. And even though it's way wider, right, than this big blind range, it still has a slight edge going to the flop on this board, right? So as a result, when we go to the strategy, it still gets to bet 53% of the time because it has a range advantage and a nut advantage. Right? And that's why we get to bet. We don't get to bet just because we raised, right? Or we do because we have an uncapped range that has very strong hands and they have a capped range that doesn't have as many strong hands as we do. Does that make sense? Amazing. So, what GTO Wizard can actually do, right, is what's pretty cool is that see these buckets, right? Uh, sorry. So, see how it says set two pair? So, in this simulation, big blind is actually going to have a set 2.8% of the time. It's going to have two pair 2.1% of the time. It's going to have top pair 19.4% of the time, as opposed to the button, right? It's going to have top pair more often. It's going to have two pair roughly around the same time, and it's going to have sets, even though it has aces, right? It just has such a wider range that it's only going to happen 2% of the time. This is why, right, that it has this total range advantage by 2%. So it says we can bet small 53% of the time. And I'm showing you this because this is how a solver thinks, right? Now, when we end up node locking, it's going to show you why it changes. Now, let's go back to the beginning of this solve again. The button opens, the big blind calls, right? It comes ace-7 deuce offsuit. The big blind checks, right? Big blind checks in flow, right? Like there's not a lot of donking that happens. Okay, so donk means that it comes from the big blind, right? So the big blind leads out. That's a donk bet. And in this simulation, it actually happens a little bit. Yeah, 4.9%, right? But let's say in this go round, big blind checks, which is what happens most of the time anyway, right? If we take a look at this, what hands is it betting most frequently, right? And what hands is it checking back a lot? Because you can see that it actually, in this solve, it checks back 47% of the time. That's a lot, right? Because a lot of people would be taking 9-6 suited, and if they're opening it, they just bet 100% hoping for a fold, and then they check back when they don't improve, right? Okay, so we're going to look at what hands does it like to bet and what hands does it like to check. And you're going to look at it and tell me, and pretty much you're just going to tell me what is the most red and what is the least red. This is a bunch of random shit, right? So first I'm going to ask you this question, then we're going to talk about the random shit. Why do you think pocket sevens and pocket deuces bet full frequency while pocket aces bets like, what is this, 90% of the time? Why, or 86%? Why do you think that is? That is one very, very good point, right? What do you think another reason would be? To and let's loop in some of what we talked before. What is a reason to protect and check back top set on a static, dry, disconnected board? Okay, great. So when we have pocket sevens, right, or pocket deuces, yes, you're there. Do you want me to tell you? You're there. I know you're there. I know you're there. Right. I know it's good. It's no. This is really. I mean, this is what we call a breakthrough, right? And this is what it is. When we have pocket sevens or pocket deuces, right? What could they have a lot of that we are not blocking? Think about their total range, right? Exactly. They have a lot of top pair, which is always going to call, right? Top pair is never going to fold to a 33% bet. Doesn't matter what ace they have, right? Exactly. So when we have aces, a lot of their range, which is ace X, right? Now doesn't have anything to call with because we have two aces in our hands. Okay, so a general rule, and write this one down, right? Is this: we slow play, right? Because we want to capture the EV from the bottom of villain's range, not the top. For instance, right? If we have aces here and they have pocket sevens, right? We're getting the money regardless of anything, right? But if we have aces here and they have 10-9 suited and they start bluffing, right? On the turn, we check back and slow play because they are going to take the bottom of their range and start bluffing it. That's the reason why. We don't slow play coolers, right? It's not like slow play for check back for deception. You hear that so much. We're checking back for deception. We are checking this back because one, we are blocking a lot of their calls or their continues, a lot of their ace X, right? On this static, dry, disconnected board, meaning there are not a lot of draws, right? And we want them to catch up a little bit, right? And we want them to start putting money in with the worst parts of their range. So we're slow playing not to capture value from pocket sevens because pocket sevens is going to call us, they're going to raise us. It doesn't fucking matter, right? We are trying to capture equity from say we bet here, right? And 6-4 is going to fold mostly everything. Like sometimes in this sim, they're going to raise, sometimes they're going to call with some backdoors. But say we check our aces and a 5 now comes. Let's see what they start doing with 6-4 suited. They're betting, right? See how this is now a bet from the big blind? They're just leading out. We're capturing equity that, sure, they have an open and straight draw one card, right? But we're now capturing equity that would not have given us money. They would have folded pretty much everything. So that's what we are like. We're capturing equity from their king 4 and their king 3. We're capturing equity from their 8-6 and their 5-4, which is turning into a bluff now, right? We are not capturing, we don't care about the equity we're capturing from ace-7 or pocket sevens or pocket deuces because we crush them anyway. So if our villains are not going to start turning 5-4 into a bluff, right? If they're not going to start betting out 6-4 or king 4 or king 3, we might as well just bet our pocket aces all the time. right? Because we're actually not capturing the equity and they're not bluffing enough, right? But okay, so for this solve, and we only have 10 more minutes, I can go longer, but I want to show you how this solve changes when we start bringing in differing ranges and player dynamics, because this is where the solver is going to make a lot more sense to you, okay? But I wanted to show you why things do what they do. Also, right? One more question going back to, we looked at what likes to bet. What likes to check in this solve? You're the button. What's a really easy one that likes to check most of the time? Like 90% of the time? Kings, right? Why do you think that is? Well, it's very different than having aces, right? This is what it is, right? Is that kings doesn't care if a nine comes, right? Notice how pocket nines are betting, right? Way more frequently, and pocket tens are betting a little bit less. Jacks are betting a little bit less. Queens are betting a little bit less than that, and kings are betting even less than that, because kings doesn't care if a nine comes, right? Queens really only cares if a king comes, right? Kings doesn't Kings don't care if a jack comes, right? Because it's like if they have an ace, they're gonna like they're if I have kings and they have an ace, this is a really static board. I can't change the fact that the ace comes, right? So it's checking one to protect, a checking range. So if a king comes, we now have nuts, right? Because if we bet 100% of the time with kings, if a king comes, we can't have pocket kings anymore, right? And also, it's like if they don't have a king, if our opponent in the big blind, doesn't have an ace, right? Then we're good. Then we're most of the time we're good. So we're actually not extracting that much value from anything if we do bet, right? We're just kind of value owning ourselves, and we don't care what comes on the turn. We can't get any worse if they have an ace, right? Can't get any worse, right? So there are not a lot of draws here for them to call. Like, yeah, they could call with a seven and hit a two pair. So there's just not a lot to protect against. Whereas if we have pocket nines on a7 deuce, we really hate it when a jack 10 queen or king comes. So we like to bet that to fold out queen jack, to fold out king 10, to fold out all these hands where all these overcards can come. It's like we're cleaning up our equity with a lot of these hands. Does that make sense? Whereas kings doesn't need to clean up any equity because either it's way behind, right, or it's way ahead, right? And it just doesn't care. So it's like it's why we're seeing a lot of these hands betting, and kings is the extreme example, and nines is an extreme example where like it loves to bet because it just wants all the broadways to fold, right? It's the same thing as like why all the queen nines are coming out, because it's like, okay, we know they're never folding an ace, right? But when we do bet, are they folding queen 10? Are they folding queen jack? Are they folding king 10? Right? So betting with queen 9 is a massive win, right? If you have queen 9 and you get queen 10 to fold, that's a huge fucking honking win. That's like fuck yeah, we got queen 10 to fold. It's really simple. It's like, oh, we got king 10 to fold. That's fucking great. Like, that is the object of betting queen 9. It's not to start putting ace 10 in a tough spot, right? Because it doesn't have a tough decision. It's always going to call, right? We are betting jack 9 here because we want to put king 6 in a tough spot. Does that make sense? So we're bluffing with a lot of our hands that can get better hands to fold, right? We're checking with a lot of hands that can't extract value from that much on this board, like kings and queens. And we're betting with hands like 8s and 9s and 10s to clean up equity from the overcards. So we don't just check back and let a free card hit. That is the composition of why in this simulation we are betting and sometimes we're not betting. Now, on the other hand, right, we'll look at a hand like ace 7 offsuit, and it is betting a lot, but it's not betting that much because of the same reason why we're not betting aces 100% of the time, right? Because we're literally blocking everything they can call with, right? Whereas we are betting 7s and deuces full frequency because they can have so much ace X to call with, right? Now, the reason why we don't really like betting ace 5, ace 4, and ace 3 is because, and we like betting ace king and ace queen and ace jack a little bit more, is because ace king can get value from ace 9, ace 8, ace 6, right? And ace 5, right, can't really get value from that much ace X, right? So what did it, and you'll see this in solvers, you'll see this in a lot of different things that are weaker ace X on these ace high boards, since they can't get 3 streets of value unless you're going against a fucking calling station who's going to call you down with second or third or fourth pair, right? It's like they're just going to be showing up with better aces than our ace 4, right? So we like to check these back sometimes because we know we can't get 3 streets of value, right? Okay, one more thing before we end. And do you have like 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes to go over? Or not tonight? I, no, I 100% agree. If you want to just end this and we can go into the same, because what this is what I wanted to show you, right? Is the same exact range, right? Button versus big blind, but big blind doesn't 3-bet as much and calls way more. How that affects our button strategy. Yeah. Yeah. This is, I know it is. So I've, I love that. I love that. Let me ask you a question. Um, have you downloaded this yet? They give you a free number of hands. What I would do, even if you pay the one that's like 40 or $50 a month, it gives you all of the GTO solves, right? And what you do is you play 150 big blinds and it gives you all the opening sizes, right? With cold calls or with not. So ultimately, this is the range that we're working with. If you want to look at your game, and if you want to look at, actually, this is your homework, right? Because you don't need you don't need to pay for it, right? Yeah, yeah, right. Go through, go through, right? Cash 150 big blinds because this is the game you play with, right? 8 max, right? And we'll go chip EV, which means no rake. Right now, we'll just look at no rake, right? And we'll look at with cold calls, right? Yeah. So what cold with cold call means is that, like, say under the gun raises, right? That means that under the gun one has an option to call or raise, right? So without cold calls is either three bet or fold. That's without cold calls. But this one, and this is kind of what your game plays like with more cold calls in there. So we go cash, 150 big blinds, 8 max, chip EV, right? With cold calls, right? With cold calls, right? And go 3x for under the gun +1, and let's just say low jack, hijack, and then 4x for cutoff button, right? Sorry. Okay. Yes, exactly. So so for instance, you have, yeah, yeah, okay. So solutions, cash, right? Classic, 8 max, right? For stacks, we do 150 big blinds. For rake, you do chip EV, right? And then you scroll down to, we're going to do with cold calls, chip EV 3x, right? Because remember how we talked about last time, we're raising from these early positions to 3, right? So I want you to do under the gun 1, low jack and hijack, right? As, and I want you to memorize, not memorize, sorry. I want you to start looking and familiarizing yourself with these charts. The first 4 positions. So under the gun +1, low jack and hijack, 3x, right? Then for the cutoff, sorry. That's under the gun +1, low jack and hijack, right? The first 4 positions. Then I want you to go to here where it says cold calls 4x. You see that? So that just means you're opening to 40 instead of 30. I want you to look at cutoff and button. And I just want you to familiarize yourselves with that. Yes, that's opening range. This is all opening range. So you're looking at the opening or RFI range, raise first in, for under the gun, right? Under the gun 1, low jack, hijack at 3x, right? And then cutoff and button, the RFI ranges or opening ranges at 4x. Okay, what it means, okay. Okay, so it doesn't mean limping in. Okay. What it means is that, say I raise under the gun +1, right? With cold calls, LoJack and every other position now has the option to either call or three bet or phone. That they have the option to cold call, right? Whereas if we did with no cold calls, right, it's either three bet or fold, right? So what you'll see is now how this is only red or fold. Yeah, so sorry, that's what cold call means. So no. We are just working on opening ranges from just start familiarizing yourself with what will now be the new baseline of your opening ranges, right? And it's really similar to what you had before. What okay, so the short answer is that GTO does okay, so what you'll see, right? Okay, you see this under the gun range, right? You see how it's raising 10.4% when it raises to $40, right? When it changes and goes to $30, it's opening wider to 12%. If someone gave you charts, right, without with yeah, because if you raise a smaller number, right, if you raise 2x, you get to raise more. You get to raise more hands. If you raise bigger, you have to be tighter, right? Right? So someone gave you just a bland chart, right? That doesn't take size into account, right? So what this lets you do is say, hey, in a GTO solve, can I raise this profitably 3x, right? And that's pretty much why it differs from what you had. That makes sense? All right, cool. So we will meet again next week. I want you to, yeah, you don't have to pay for any of this. Go through your opening ranges, right? And the reason why I want you to work with the program is because I want you to get comfortable with looking at an interactive chart, right? Because once we start clicking around and node locking and stuff, I just want your senses to not get overwhelmed by what you're looking at, right? So even if it's half an hour a day, just click some fucking buttons, right? And yeah, we'll end there. And dude, also, if you're looking at this stuff tomorrow, or if you're like looking at it tonight and or on Wednesday or Thursday, and you have any questions, never, you don't have to wait till Monday. You don't have to wait till Monday with a hand. You don't have to wait. Just text me. I'm always here. Okay. And if you're clicking around buttons, don't waste this week if you can't figure it out. Just call me, do anything. I'm letting you know right now that I'm always available to you. Right. So yeah, I want you to get familiar with this program or really just charts in general. Um, and let me know if you have any questions along the way. Okay. All right, cool, bud. Um, how'd you do this week, by the way? Yeah, I mean, we didn't. Right, right. Okay, that's see like this like that helps me, right? That helps me because if this is the thing, right? Is that the reason why I'm telling you to raise different sizes is just because I want you to be more positionally aware, right? I kind of want you to know that you're on the cutoff. I want you to know in your bones before everything happens that you're in the cutoff, right? That you're only going to have to face one person and position you. Um, at one point, this is going to, it's not a mistake if you raise to 35 or 30 or 40 in early position. It's not a mistake, right? But what I want to happen is that you understand these charts, right? And it actually becomes more muscle memory than before because you do have an issue, right? With getting a little bit lost in the sauce of, hey, this person just opened and I can exploit them. And I'm not positionally aware that there are two people behind me. Someone might just cold call my three bet with jacks, you know? So all of this is definitely for a reason. It's not like becoming positionally aware is not it's not a mathematical lesson really. It's not like this is not a box to constrain you. It is, like I said in the beginning, a place to give you structure so you can get very creative with your reads, right? Because um, because your reads, the way you're using them, um, it's likely costing you money, right? Because you have like, I really like how you recognize that this woman in the hijack was raised folding to three bets a lot. I fucking love that. Like, that's what I look for as well. But if you're not providing yourself with a structure to be like, okay, she opened the hijack, she's probably folding a little bit too much. Oh, it's like, this is where you went to 9-3, right? Where like where I would have went to is like, oh, I'm now raising ace nine all of the time. I'm raising ace seven suited all the time. I'm raising, like, if she's really folding, I'm getting after it with king eight. Like, that's the adjustments we make. That's the creativity we make. Because if, yeah, not half court shots, because if you somehow get to the flop and she doesn't fold this time and you have 9-3 offsuit, you don't really have a good plan. And I'm telling you right now, I can't teach you a good plan. You know? So it's all, being positionally aware is super, super important. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send you this. Let me know if you have anything you want to talk about. Get familiar with this program. You don't have to like, and you don't even have to go to the flop. I don't want you to go to the flop, right? I want you to just starting getting familiar with race sizes. You can change 3x to 4x. You can change 3x to 5x if you want. I think it goes all the way up to 7x that it's solved, right? Like, play around with it if you want to, as much or as little as you want, but definitely familiarize yourself with what I gave you. Um, I'll send you these slides, even though we only got like 2/3 of the way done. It's completely cool because there's a lot of good stuff there. And have a good week. Yeah. Okay, so if you're playing five-handed, right? Under right. So if you're playing five-handed, right? You're only, there is no low jack. There is no under the gun one. There is no under the gun, right? It just all starts at the hijack. Yeah, yeah, you work backwards from button. So if, like, big blind, small blind are always the same, button's always the same, right? But if you don't have, if you're short, you take out under the gun first, then +1, then low jack. Yeah. Yeah, because you get to open wider because there are less people behind you. So it's not, yeah, it's not like a true under the gun. All right, cool, bro. Cool, yeah. Thank you, bro. And all right, will do. Thank you so much, buddy. All right.